brings us to item number 16. Action is necessary, appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. I'll entertain a motion for item number 16. Mr. Lovelace.
Chairman, I'd like to make the motion that we approve the items presented in executive session that require a vote.
That'd be selected employment items,
yes, sir.
Exhibit A. Thank you. Is there a second? Ms. Hammond seconds. Are there any questions? Any questions? As many as favor the motion will raise their hands. And that's unanimous. Thank you, including the two online. That brings us to item number 17, the second reading for fiscal year 2021, general fund budget. I'll entertain a motion to accept second reading. Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we approve the second reading of fiscal year 2021 general fund budget as shown in Exhibit C.
Is there a second? Ms. Hammond seconds. And I suspect we may have some questions. Dr. Moulton, do you want Mr. Richardson to come to the microphone?
There will be some detailed questions that he will answer from the exhibit. Ms. Richardson, thank you for your preparation for this evening's conversation.
And I'll ask board members, the exhibit, I believe it's C, that you have, has page numbers and line items on it. It'd be much easier for all of us to follow if you refer to that page number or specific budget line item. And I'm going to recognize Ms. Gardner because she had a question earlier that I asked her to hold until now. Ms. Gardner.
Okay, I'm still looking for the page, but it is line item 231, so it is page, I'm getting there. It is
16.
page 16. Oh, you found it faster than I did. So I noticed that on line item 231, Board of Education, the one right above it, or I guess that wasn't 231, was it? Oh, I see, 272. The other objects, our budget is increased significantly over year, and I'm wondering if you can explain to me what the $100,000 increase has been.
Sure. That is where we pay for our general liability insurance, and we've missed that budget the last couple of years, quite honestly. So this actually matches what our actual expenditures were for last fiscal year.
So it's not an actual budget increase because we've increased, but it's a past increase that we're just.
It is a past increase, but that insurance goes up on an annual basis. Now, I did not show it as a new item because because we're so late in the process with budgeting this year, we're not having to guess what teacher salaries are because we've got those actual salaries. So that's enabled us to be able to move our resources around. So that's why you don't see that as a new item, but just an increase on this line just to cover our costs for general liability insurance.
Ms. Gardner, did you have another question?
That's good.
Is it other questions? Mr. Lovelace?
Okay, on page 15, line item 221, improvement of instruction, there's over the 18-19 year to this year, there's about a $300,000 increase. Could you tell us, it went up further than that in the 19 year, and then it's back down, about $50,000.
I apologize. Which line item was that?
I was looking at line 246.
Okay, I see. I don't know the specifics on that one, but I can tell you it's obviously got something to do with either newer people coming in at lower salaries, which we've had a good bit of that. This is mostly our instruction department. I don't know specifically on why that reduced, but I would say that's probably got more to do with we've had several people retire and hired younger people at lower salaries.
Okay. Also, can I go with one more?
Yes, sir.
I got about 5 of these, but anyway. Okay, on Board of Education, line item 272. Okay, in 18-19, it's increased about $117,000 from this year, which is other objects. What are other objects in there?
That is where our general liability insurance is paid. We've got general liability insurance and some of your fees for school board association, those type of things. But the majority of that is our general liability insurance.
Okay, and that goes under the Board of Education,
Yes, sir.
GL? Okay.
And that's across the state. I mean, that's where it's mandated that we record those.
Okay, and then on page number 19, okay, under Planning and Administration, line item 344, Contracted Services. And we hired Maloney and McBroom, I believe, for $75,000 or something like that. We signed a contract. Shouldn't that be in that line item? Or I see where it says contracted services and it's a zero.
This is under which, I'm sorry?
This is
Planning
on page,
Administration?
I'm sorry, page 19, line item 344, contracted services.
I do not believe that will be where we pay for that particular contract, but I do not recall, Mr. Lovelace, off the top of my head, where that was paid from.
Okay, is that a capital improvement thing that, or no?
No, sir, it would be a contracted service.
Okay, and then, I was looking at, line item 352, information services. Okay, this thing went up, it's been up like $117,000 from 18-19 until this year. And that's in 3 years, so I don't know what the increase is, but that's gonna be probably a 15 to 20% increase, somewhere along in there, just looking at it. That's on page 3, it's on 20, it's on page 352, item 352.
Okay, that looks like that's just, that's just additional salaries over the last 3 years in that department.
I mean, if we
And-
added,
and I-
added somebody to that?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, we reclassified, we had a half-time employee that was split between two offices, one being communications and one being, I cannot recall now, that we combined into just being for communications, and that's probably why you see that increase.
Okay, and then on 367, on that same page, okay, we had a $720,000 decrease in technology and data processing services. And it seems like, especially in this year, that would be, we would be spending more money, wouldn't we, in this year? I mean, projecting it forth. I mean, just like we were talking about, I'm not trying to, just trying to figure out with these hot spots and everything that we talked about, and wouldn't we be budgeting for those in the next 6 months?
Well, the hot spots are paid from, and actually, we're not paying for those are being paid for by the state, given to us, I think, is the way the hot spots are working.
Yeah, I mean, but that would be
but-
for the next one.
But any type of equipment type, technology equipment like you're speaking of would be part of our $3 million capital budget, where we would be looking for that to come from.
But that wouldn't be on here, would it?
No, sir, this is strictly general fund.
Okay, I just was wondering if we had such a big decrease, and I was trying to figure out how in this year with, looks like we're gonna be really, intensively looking at, the distance learning, and I was just wondering how that happened, but.
Yes,
I mean,
sir, we will, and that's another reason why you saw us do what we did towards the end of last year, so that we can set ourselves up to be able to deal with those type of things as well.
Okay. That's it. I mean, that's all.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Ms. Hammond?
Mr. Richardson, did we have any savings from something like the electric bills being
Absolutely, we
closed for
did.
several months?
We do, and I have that information. I don't have it in my brain right now, but we actually get a monthly report on what we have saved since the shutdown. So we've saved a significant amount of money on our utilities while we were shut down.
But now, we had our, of course, we had employees, but were our custodial staffs, did they work even though we didn't have the schools open?
Well, they were out for a while. We brought them back before most of our other employees. So they have been working a little bit longer than most of our other employees.
Well, the money that we did save, what does it go back to, just into your general funds?
I'm sorry.
The money, you don't know the amount, you have it, but you just don't have it to recall. the money we did save from not having the electric bills those several months.
It's still in here. It's under the maintenance, operation and maintenance,
Maintenance.
254. That's where all our utilities are budgeted. We did not touch those budgets.
So we need, it just stays in the utilities budget. We can't use it for somewhere else. We need the
Well,
money.
for budget purposes, that's correct. Now, for money that we carry forward, obviously, that's a different story altogether. So when we know what our final numbers are revenue-wise and what our final expenditures are, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where we ended up the year. That's where our savings will show up.
Good. I'm just thinking with all the thoughts we have with what we may not know will become another need of money. I just want to be sure we could use that at
Well,
different
believe
places.
me, that keeps me up at night, and I think about it constantly, and that's why we've really, really tried to cut back so that we would be hopefully in a good position to weather the storm this year.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Hutchison?
I have a question. It's page 7, item line number 5, kindergarten programs. And I see that there's a decrease of 354,000. Can you address that, please?
That was at kindergarten? Was that
Yes.
kindergarten? That is where we actually reclassified a portion of those salaries for those teachers who were actually teaching in our Montessori programs. They were originally classified, they are kindergarten teachers, they were really originally classified as kindergarten teachers, and we've moved them to page 6, account 118 Montessori. And that doesn't account for all of it. The remainder of that could be kindergarten teachers being reclassified to other grade levels, that kind of thing. But majority of that was just a move to Montessori.
Okay.
And for a
Thank
point
you.
of clarity, Mr. Richardson, and for the board to know, Montessori can be multi-age, whereas kindergarten funds are earmarked for kindergarten students, whereas Montessori is, could be multiple ages, and we're growing the program at H.E. Corley Elementary to make sure that magnet program is successful. So when we bring it out of the kindergarten funding source, keeping it specified for kindergarten students, and put into Montessori, we can make sure that that magnet program is more successful to bring together multi-ages of students as that program grows over the course of the elementary experience at Corley.
Thank you. That helps.
Other questions? All right, we had an opportunity had a public hearing, and we met the obligation to announce that and to hold the public hearing. We've had 2 readings of the budget. We've had that motion in second with discussion. As many as favor adoption of the budget as presented will raise their hand. And that's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for the hard work, and I'm sure we'll be hearing back from you as soon as the General Assembly comes back to Columbia.
And Mr. Cates, may I also recognize Director Shealy over on the back row? He, of course, is an extension of Mr. Richardson's success, our entire finance department. Mr. Richardson, thank you for your leadership, and Mr. Shealy, thank you so much for your support of Mr. Richardson's work. And please extend to your staff our appreciation.
Thank you very much. He's sitting in the dark back there.
Yes, he
I didn't know he was back there.
He's hiding.
He's hiding. So that brings us to item number 18A. I'll entertain a motion for item 18A, and we'll deal with it just as it's listed. Once I have a motion and a second, I'll recognize Dr. Melton to address those items. Do I have a motion for 18A? Mr. Lovelace.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 18A in its entirety.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Hammond seconds. All right, Dr. Melton, I'll recognize you, and I'm sure you'll recognize someone for that.
This will be another example of a coordinated effort. Mr. Giuliano, if you'll make your way to the microphone, please. Tonight, you're going to hear us use different language. You're going to hear us request a waive. You're going to hear us request to suspend, modify, and adopt. To make sure that we've calibrated our definitions as a staff, the definitions of our use of this is aligned with the School Boards Association of South Carolina. And of course, our board has these definitions to make sure as we make these recommendations as an administrative team that the board understands what we're requesting, and then we communicate any support that we have from the board to take action. we can make sure that our school administrative teams are equipped with the right information, because typically when board policies are revised and edited and then adopted, that becomes a new work in School District 5. This will have some different time-bound guidance for this, and some will be a differencing of implementation depending on the request of the administration. Mr. Giuliano, you're first this evening with a couple of policies from the Office of Instruction.
Thank you, Dr. Melton, Mr. Cates, members of the board. The first policy that I'm bringing forward is Administrative Rule IHBIB, Primary, Pre-Primary Education, Child Development. And our request is to waive this policy for the duration of the hybrid scheduling model due to the content within this policy that states 4 days per week, 2.5 hours per day, which is exclusive rather than inclusive. This is to accommodate for our 4K students during the hybrid model. So once we shift to the traditional scheduling model, this policy would go back into effect. That's the first request. I also have a second that is next for policy IJNDAA, Distance Online and Virtual Learning Recommendation. And the recommendation here is to suspend the following statement during the 2021 school year, for the duration of the 2021 school year, to accommodate our virtual scheduling option, which is 5. The district will not use distance, online, or virtual education courses as the sole medium for instruction in any required subject area for students in grades K through 6. We'd like to make sure that we suspend that statement so we can make sure we have our 5 virtual scheduling program for kindergarten through 6th grade. Dr. Melton, at this time, those are my 2 that I'm bringing forward at this moment.
And Mr. Cates, with your permission, we'll do the third and couple all these together. Mr. Richardson had the next request regarding policy ECB, entitled Buildings and Grounds Maintenance. Mr. Richardson.
He's too tall. Thank you, Dr. Melton. The only thing we're asking for in this policy is the waiver of the following sentence. Each building principal is responsible for operation and maintenance of his or her school and will supervise custodial staff members as they carry out regular operational and normal maintenance duties. And we're just asking to suspend that for this year, at least for the foreseeable future. What we're trying to do is avoid any situations where we may have some of our custodial staff become ill. They're shorthanded. It's tough to get substitutes, especially properly trained substitutes. So we want to have the ability to rearrange and maybe even put some teams together to go in and clean schools when we have, if we have, illness go through the school or something like that.
Mr. Cates, that completes Exhibit D. I don't know if you want us to do the entire number 18 or by exhibits,
Let
so
me
I'll
do
pause for you.
A, and then we'll go to B. Do we have questions regarding the A section?
I do. On the third one that you talked about, Mr. Richardson, the building and grounds, who would be responsible if you remove the principal? I mean, I'm looking at lines of authority, not who's going to actually do the work. I'm sure that's what you're saying, is you don't expect the principal to be in there, in the toilet at 10:30 at night or something, working, cleaning the building, But what I was getting at was what would be the line of authority if you removed him from it?
Well, we don't want to remove that line of authority by any means. What we want to do is be able to suspend it should we have the need. And just by doing that, we're not, we don't want to leave one school shorthanded, which potentially could happen. And so, we're trying to think outside of the box a little bit and looking at how we can possibly maybe even, draw custodians or custodial or facility managers together in teams to go out and really hit a school hard if we need to do some deep cleaning. That kind of thing is what we're looking at. We're not looking at taking any authority. We don't have the personnel, quite frankly, to oversee the entire custodial staff across the district. So that's not by any means what we're looking for. We just want to suspend that just to give us the ability to do some things should the need arise.
Could we word it like that? Because, in my business, if you don't have a manager, you don't have anything because it doesn't get done. If you don't have somebody responsible for that, and I'm sure that's what you intend, but if the words aren't like that, maybe it needed to be.
Mr. Lovelace, if I may, we were looking, when we say "we," it may be important for us to define "we." The Office of Facilities and Operations is going to be instrumentally involved with this. So Director Cannon, Angela Etheridge, Steve Kane, those are 3 different people. But we also know, should something happen to one of 3 identified staff, we have to have a second person ready to stand in the place of that person. So you're not going to hear us say necessarily a name, but you will hear us say roles and responsibilities in departments. Mr. Richardson, of course, can't be directly involved with every school facility,
No.
but he's updated for that as well. So if it's your request that we have that conversation, we can certainly do that. We have discussed this with our principals to make sure that they knew when we were bringing this forth this evening, so that they could focus on the operations of the school, not have the cleanliness of the school as their primary responsibility. They're working in conjunction with our Office of Facilities instead.
Okay, I understand.
It feels like that's very similar to what we did with the food services policy a few meetings ago, to where there was not a replacement in the line of supervision, but an additional point person. And is that
The difference
similar?
is with that policy, we actually revised the policy with approval, went through the full process of that. I'm looking towards Mr. Beatonbow back at the back of the room. Whereas with this one, we're requesting a suspension. So we're
Okay.
not looking to make a revision in policy, but we are looking to make a suspension.
All right, thank
So, Mr. Lovelace, in your remarks, we can certainly make sure that we have a clear line of communication so that principals know who to reach out to through positions in the event that this is supported.
Yeah, I just think we need to have a clear, a clear staffing directive of who's in charge of what if something fails, and that's all I was saying.
It might also be accomplished in an administrative rule. If we choose to suspend that part, if you could do that with an administrative rule, if that's the easier way to do it, whatever facilitates that. Dr. Melton will come back. Ms. Hammond?
This is a general question. I wrote the words down, waiver, suspend, modify, and adapt. When you talked about some of them to accommodate the virtual all year, I just wanted to be sure, Dr. Melton, the 5 was going to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody that signed up for that would stay in that for the full semester? Am I correct?
That is the intent.
I
But
mean,
if we
and I
do
know
have-
it's fluid.
Yes,
I'm-
ma'am, if it's fluid, as you said,
I'm
and
with
if we
you.
did have a student that was looking to return to an on-campus, we would have a process comparable with hardship. So
Okay.
there would be an outreach to Dr. Harris's office, a review process that would go through that. But we're looking for a commitment from families because of the staffing effect.
Right.
That we have the assurance of how we can staff the school successfully to get the 5 program operational. Yes, ma'am.
Right, and I think that's important for us to, distinguish for the public. So, but the 5 would be, even though they have to stay in it for the semester, I think I'm confused. Is it gonna go all year? I mean, when it says all year, in other words, December ends this year, but you're talking about the school year.
The academic year, yes, ma'am.
Academic year.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I want to be sure, and some of these will only apply to, provided, as Ms. Hutchinson's question about, if the COVID worsens, we have to be prepared. But the other, if it's the hybrid, as we were told on July 23rd, we're asking that to be till October 8th. Am I correct? Have I got that date? I mean, we start school the September the 8th. and-
Yes, ma'am. If we can return to 5 days on site, October the 8th was the date that I'm looking to make sure I have a head nod, because thank you. I need that assurance that October the 8th is a date that we were looking, that if we can return to 5 days for those that chose hybrid, that will be
chose
the
hybrid, and
return
that would
date of
just be
that.
them.
Yes, ma'am.
And then when we did that, all of these policies, we're voting to either waiver, suspend, modify, or adapt. They would go back to normal. or-
No, ma'am, not necessarily. If we're asking for an academic year, we know that with this virus and changes, we
Okay.
may return to 5 days. And I'm hesitant to say this out loud because I'm not trying to speak it. But if something like that were to happen and we were returned, and then we had to do a shift and pivot because of changing environmental dynamics of health-related issues, having this for the academic year gives us that flexibility to go between if necessary. Of course, that is not something that I would ever want, but we're trying to be prepared rather than reactive. We're trying to be proactive.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I can tell you as a teacher, flexibility is the key. And in this situation, you know, I certainly support you having that flexibility. I just wanted to be sure I was correct about the
Yes, ma'am.
all year for the virtual. And then you did tell us that there are like a hardship thing. If somebody say they got into the virtual and it's just really some problems, they may come through your process
Yes,
and
ma'am.
ask to become part of the hybrid.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Are there other questions related specifically to the three policies in 18A? Any other questions? Hearing none, as many as favor the adoption as presented for the 18A, IHBIBR, the IJNDAA, and ECB will raise their hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you. So that brings us to 18B. Dr. Melton, I'll let you, well, let me get a motion. I apologize. It's, policies for adoption, Exhibit E. 18B, is there a motion to accept those policies? Mr. Lovelace?
I'd like to make the motion that under item 18B, that we accept the policies for adoption, Exhibit E.
Thank you. Second, Ms. Hammond. All right, Dr. Melton.
Thank you. And consistent with 18A, you're going to hear language that may differ depending on the recommendation from administration. The first two items in Exhibit E are complementary between HR and the Office of Planning and Administration. Dr. Jakes is going to get us started first regarding Title IX. Dr. Jakes.
Thank you. You have in front of you a policy, and this is related to federal changes in the Title IX law. And this is something that has happened very quickly. And this is a federal change. So these changes are happening very quickly across the nation. It is specifically in regard to Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 and the corresponding regulations. So what you'll find in these multiple pages are very specific new requirements. Rather than us developing something specific to District 5 through the language, we've had the responsibility of simply reflecting the new changes to the law to ensure that we are in compliance. And so what you'll see is a very specific focus on sexual harassment. We have that defined. We have very specific requirements for the filing of formal complaints, how to resolve specific complaints. We also have roles that are defined here. We are familiar with the role of Title IX coordinator, but we'll also have additional roles related to that, along with required training to take place. We have begun that training. More training is to come. We also have specific notices of requirement that we will be able to advertise, to put on our district materials. We also have processes for mediating sexual harassment concerns, guidelines. Those also have accompanying timelines. We also have a responsibility to outline the district's grievance process in relation to sexual harassment. We also have specifications for written notice related to that. We've also spelled out our dismissal of complaints, our investigation process, our determination of responsibilities, as well as an appeals process. There is also a mechanism for emergency removal or administrative leave when sexual harassment is identified. There are specific record-keeping processes. There is specific language about retaliation, and also a timeline that is very specific to the process. As you can see, this is very extensive. This is spelled out for us in federal requirements, and you'll find that the policy that I've shared and just gone through by heading is germane to employees and adults within the building. Dr. Harris has the companion policy, and the only difference you'll see there is that his specifically is geared toward the student and appears under the student section in policy.
Thank you, Dr. Jakes. Dr. Harris is going to go next this evening. Dr. Harris, anything that you'd like to add regarding the students' policy?
Not at all. Dr. Jakes explained it well, and again, it is specific to students in school district 5. That's all
Thank
I'd
you,
add.
Dr. Harris. The next policy is Dr. Harris's as well. This is policy ADD. Obviously, this is under our action agenda this evening, but we understand that this is an area of great concern of our staff and also our families and students. So, Dr. Harris, if you will present ADD entitled Face Covering.
Absolutely. This is a new policy from a School Boards Association that we'd like to present to you. It is in reference to face covering, and obviously it's in reference to face coverings to be worn in public settings where social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. This policy gives a definition of both face covering as well as face shield, and it also indicates that staff members, consistent with what we've tried to communicate through our reentry, that staff members are required to wear face masks, face coverings rather, and that the district will in fact provide face masks or face coverings to its staff members. There's a section regarding students. Students alike are required to wear face coverings as well, and there are certain times in which certain classes or certain activities where there is a limited exception to this, as we tried to mention as well in our reentry plan. The district will provide masks for those students who are unable to provide their own. And this policy also gives a list of exclusions or exceptions, not limited to the 3 that are listed, for the public's information: meal times, outdoor recess, and administration of medication, not limited to the 3. The policy of face coverings also includes visitors, suggestive of the fact that visitors too are required to wear face coverings while on district property. Face coverings also include that with transportation, as we made mention of earlier as well. There are accommodations that are listed here for those persons who have health or developmental conditions or for religious exemptions that would be given full consideration by the administration and superintendent or designee rather specifically. And as far as our discipline, this also indicates that discipline may be addressed through staff and students who choose or refuse rather to wear face coverings likened to that of a dress code violation in district policy.
Mr. Cates, that completes our presentation for Exhibit E.
Thank you. We'll entertain questions. I will say, just as a reminder on the Title IX policies, those were a direct reflection of changes in federal law, so we're kind of limited to any changes you may offer for those. I'm going to recognize Ms. Hutchinson.
I have a question about the face covering policy. It seems to me, as I read this, that it's saying that face covering is required for students in the classroom, which is different than what we have in the reentry plan. If this is approved by the board, will that change in the reentry plan so that students are required to wear face masks except for those accommodations that were outlined earlier?
I think one of the things that is consistent in all of what we have shared in our communication, Ms. Hutchinson, is that particularly in the classroom, that face coverings can be, as it indicates here, in classes, certain classes or activities. The emphasis here is when social distancing is applied, and I think that's really the statement that really makes all the difference here. I think we tried to suggest that in our reentry plan. Thank you for that volume. That reentry plan, as well as in this particular policy, when social distancing is applied, that students can, in fact, while in the class, while seated at their desk, can, in fact, remove, or in some cases, it's termed relax their face mask. However, if social distancing is not available and cannot be applied, then absolutely, face coverings are required in the classroom while students are seated. Again, it is also, as in our reentry policy, it also in terms of students entering and exiting our buildings and facilities, transportation, as well as in hallways and in congregate areas where there are larger masses of students, yes, mask or face coverings are required. But again, going back to the classroom, if in fact and when social distancing is applied, that 6 feet differential that we're talking about, there's opportunity to I'll say, to relax face mask. That is stated in our reentry, and that is also communicated here in this particular policy.
And Ms. Hutchison, just to, as we continue to try to connect the dots with, as you've heard me say in previous meetings, dynamic, ever-changing environments, any action taken by the board, any updates to the board, we then loop into our reentry communications, our planning. So this would be an item of interest that Dr. Harris would then take back to our school administrative teams. This is actually on our agenda to share with principals and administrators later on this week, depending on the action taken by the board tonight or any movement we may have with the board's support this evening. So yes, ma'am, that would become a part of our communications to offer updates so that we can now say there's a policy. Previously, there was an expectation within our planning. We're moving from expectations to now policy so that we can hold people, students and staff accountable.
I still, thank you for that information. I still think that can be confusing, or else I'm confused, but if we say in the classroom, if social distancing can't be achieved, you know, how do you measure that? Especially in a classroom with students. So it seems that it would make it even more difficult to have that caveat instead of just saying students wear face masks, face coverings in classrooms, period, except for the accommodations.
Ms. Hutchison, I would think as part of the staff, we're open to any revisions that simplify this. We've taken the model policy and we've tried to review it to make sure we bring it forth to you all this evening. But if there's anything that you all would suggest that would make this more clear and concise to those that we communicate it with, we're open, of course, for your feedback and for whatever revisions we need to take.
I think I'm really thinking about how it's presented in the reentry plan, and perhaps not quite following what you're saying about taking it back to the principals, as you just mentioned. But I'm thinking that this policy and what we have in the reentry plan is not the same now, but you said you're going to talk about to the principals. So that's my concern, is that will parents and will students understand exactly what we're doing with face coverings, and will that be communicated? How will that be communicated to the students?
So in an effort to make sure that I clarify, and I regret that I'm confusing, when I said we're taking it to principals later this week, that is to update them from tonight's conversation. When we've engaged principals previously, and we have 3 principals on our reentry team, thanks to Ms. Kelly Reese of Lake Murray Elementary, Mr. Vernon Sava of Dutch Fork Middle School, and Dr. Gerald Gary of Dutch Fork High School. Those 3 principals are involved with our work for the decisions that we're making to bring forth to you all. So whatever action we take this evening, when we take it to principals, it's to update them at this point. So they've been a part of the influence of drafting with those representatives and then inclusive of all principals. But now we're at the place of bringing it forth with recommendations, and then whatever action's taken, we will loop back to principals to make sure they understand what's required from this point on. As far as the lack of maybe clarity regarding at desk and at seats, the 3 to 6 feet, we're open to any revisions where you all would like to draw our attention to for your discussion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gant. I'll come to you in a moment. Let me go to Ms. Hammond first.
And my question goes along with Ms. Hutchinson's. I'm thinking about it actually in the classroom. There were 2 things about the mask that I thought we should make clear. One, of course, in the halls when classes are changing for middle and high school, I'm assuming they would have them on then. And then to Ms. Hutchinson's point, I can envision in my classroom, it would depend whether I would have them safely the 6 feet apart that we're supposed to honor, depending on the number I have in there. So that might be a question for your team, Dr. Melton, if we have any idea, and I don't know that you do yet, how many would be in a cohort, in that hybrid plan. Because with the size of most of our rooms, if they're the same size in most schools, I'm assuming they are, depending on whether it's elementary, middle, or high. If there are not a lot of other things in your room, I think you could have time where the child does not have it on if they are the 6 feet apart. But what I really wanted to go to, and this again to me goes with, and I think Ms. Hudgens makes a point to have it clarified, the most important thing, and I know I teach 8th grade and I'm thinking about them, we really need to know the consequence for that child that's not going to wear it. And I know that you think, well, the teacher can tell them, and if not, I'm going to send them to the principal. There really are children, whether y'all believe me or not, that don't always mind the rules. and I think that's important for us to talk about now, what that consequence is, because that's going to really depend on our consequence is going to depend, Ms. Hutchinson, on how well the principal and the teacher can adhere to our policy. So I know that was a lot, but I appreciate her questions because we need to clarify all that.
Ms. Hammond, I think I would start with the consequence will depend on the policy, of course. So this is important for us to have this conversation. Dr. Harris and his team have already approved the disciplinary handbook for the coming year, but this would lead to a review of that and any necessary changes. The last thing we want to do is to add to teachers and to administrators the power struggle of mask versus not mask. We know that there are families who have a strong opinion whether they support or disagree. That is real within our community, real within our country. So we're sensitive to that, but we know that we need to provide a safe environment for learning and a safe environment for working. So we're bringing forth to you all tonight whatever action the board may choose to take. We will then execute our next steps for that implementation and what those consequences may look like. But knowing that teachers are going to have more direct access and observations than others will, so we need to position our teachers for success. But we want teachers teaching. We don't want teachers on consistent mask control. We want them to be able to teach a rigorous instructional program, whichever model families have chosen, rather than having to constantly focus upon the behavior of mask versus not. So that is it's a delicate balance. I don't know if Dr. Harris would like to add anything tonight, but we've discussed it so many times that I just want to look to him one more time to see if there's something that I may have omitted that he would like to include.
I think, well, thank you for your explanation and clarity in that. I'll just simply say that what we are currently looking at in terms of discipline, Ms. Hammond, is as I mentioned, liken it unto a dress code violation. And there is a range of interventions as it relates to dress code currently. We would follow suit that way.
Mr. Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Cates. And I think probably don't need to say a lot more about the mask, but I would assume with we know we're in a fluid situation. We know that from the surveys that have come back, about 65% of our students have chosen the on-site model, whether it be elementary or the beyond elementary school when we're in the hybrid model. So there will be some of our classrooms, even if the population is half of what it used to be, which it may not be quite half, they will be in situations where social distancing may not be able to be met. So I guess my question is this: as a reentry team or the principals that are studying this, will it be a call for the classroom teacher to be able to make, or will that teacher make that call along with her principal to say, and the administrators will know how many kids are in each room? But I know there's a great cleaning going on in District 5 right now, and a lot of furniture, bookcases, anything that's excess is on the way out so that we can clean and have all the room possible. But my question is, will administrators work with teachers to make a determination if a classroom will or will not be socially distanced in certain, and my thought is they'll have to make that determination, but has that been talked about in the reentry team mode?
Yes, sir, it has been talked about quite a bit, in fact, because this is one of those big discussion items that become personal and very sensitive. And we want to make sure that we prepare our administrators for success so that they can be supportive of teachers. And Mr. Gant, just to confirm what you've described, our physical spaces will look differently. Some of the furniture that students have been accustomed to seeing in classrooms will not be there for the academic year that we're beginning. We're moving some furniture out, so the essential furniture will remain in the classroom, but Mr. Richardson and team have made sure that we are going in to move furniture or classroom materials that may not be furniture that's essential will no longer be in those environments to make sure that it can be as safe as safe as an environment as possible.
Thank you. Dr. Harris or Dr. Melton, on the mask policy, it says exceptions for wearing a face covering may include, but are not limited to, the following activities. And I know it says, but are not limited to, and when you then list a few, it kind of draws your attention to those. Since we have in our reentry plan a statement that mask may be removed when social distancing is possible in the classroom, for clarity, should that maybe be the fourth bullet there, just so that people see that? Or were we intentional to only put those three? I don't want to confuse the issue.
We've used a model policy that has not necessarily included District 5 language for the development. So we've tried to refine some of the model policy suggestions. We can certainly add that in because Dr. Harris and team have worked with a variety of partners on that. So if it's the will of the board that we have that insertion, we could easily do that. I continue to hear from the state level, and you've heard through press conferences and press releases, the requirements from the State Department have already been shared. So at the local level, we have the opportunity to build upon that, but ultimately, it's based upon the state guidance we currently have, it will be the discretion of the teacher to monitor that and what the teacher is comfortable doing. So from our perspective, how can we manage that with continuity from the student lens, from the parent lens, and from the staff lens? How can we do the best alignment and support of this policy to make sure that masks don't become the primary point of contention and interference for the coming year?
Mr. White.
To follow on that point, I mean, I read this policy, it really doesn't give anybody discretion to make an exception. And if the teacher is intended to be the one to make the discretion, it just says, I mean, it says in the first paragraph that the CDC recommends masks when social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. And then it says all students are required to wear. Certain classes or activities may be granted limited exception at discretion of the superintendent or his or her designee. I would assume that might be some special event. The district will make masks available for students who are unable to provide their own. And then I go back to what Mr. Cates just highlighted, the language that says exceptions for wearing may include but are not limited to. So it suggests that there's somebody to make that discretion. If that's the teacher, if it's intended, then we probably ought to indicate that. I guess there's a lot of people listening because somebody just texted me a question that said, well, what if the teacher gets up and walks around the class, or a student goes to the bathroom and people have their mask off and are seated, but they start moving around, or someone gets up to walk and then they start coughing. I mean, I guess what I'm hearing you say is you really got to have the teacher in charge in each classroom. That's not something we can totally, describe every scenario perhaps, and maybe better. And you have to, I guess, train the teachers to implement rules in a way that are safe.
This will be enveloped into our PBIS system. What we choose, what the will of the board is, and how we then develop this will be incorporated to our PBIS expectations. Although we can compare it to a dress code violation, if a student were to come to school with a pair of shorts that's too short or a T-shirt that is inappropriate with content of display, you can address that once. Somebody may go to the bathroom and change clothes, not that we've ever had that happen before, but you will likely attend to it once, but a mask could be minute by minute, class by class, experience by experience. So the difference with this would be the frequency of which this violation could occur will happen more often than a dress code violation does occur. That's where it becomes so contentious, I suppose, and so political, unfortunately. So, yes, sir, the teachers are going to see Mr. White, the teachers will see students more often than administrators will, because administrators will be moving throughout the building, but teachers will see students throughout the instructional period and at different portions of the day. So when students are arriving from the bus loop, we will have administrators and those on duty of teachers that have assigned duties. They'll be watching for this to be able to call out. And I'll compare that to not having their ID. Remember to wear your ID. Remember to wear your mask. That will be a quick response that people on supervisory duties will be doing. But when students get into the classroom and instruction begins, it's that responsibility of the student and then also the teacher who is supervising, because administrators may not be dropping into every class period, will not be seeing every lesson that's being instructed. And as soon as they leave the room, we know that something could happen with the mask as soon as an administrator exits a room.
Ms. Hutchinson.
It seems, can I make a recommendation? It seems that we need to add some discretion to identify the teacher. I mean, you've got the superintendent or his or her designee for certain classes or activities, and then you got the administrators in the common areas, and then you got teachers in the classrooms. And it seems like there ought to be a little bit of clarity of who gets to make in the classroom it'd be the teacher's responsibility, and in the common ways it'd be administrators, and then special activities or classes would be the superintendent or his or her designee.
I appreciate the feedback and the clarity. The more specific we make this, the more specific we monitor this. So as we think through the teacher lens, how can we support teachers for their instructional responsibilities? How can we support the wellness of the environment? That's where it becomes divisive.
But without trying to dictate the processes, don't we need to have the person who has the discretion reference?
Yes, sir. I would suggest we do.
Yeah, without trying to delineate processes here, because that would be, I think, on a case-by-case or room-by-room or...
And potentially lesson by lesson, depending on the content of the teacher. If I'm a speech-language pathologist, my responsibilities will be different than another teacher who may have assigned computer stations. So it's going to differ depending on the lesson, the content, and the responsibilities of the teacher that's instructing.
I mean, it seems like a simple point, but I mean, this is for y'all to administer, but it seems like, I'm sorry, but it seems like a simple rule would be if you get up from your desk, you put your mask on. And if you're 6 feet away in your desk, that's an easy way to give them some space to breathe. And it does get hard to breathe when you get hot wearing these masks.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure. Ms. Gardner, I'll come to you. Ms. Hutchinson is ready, then I'll go to Ms. Gardner, then Ms. Hammond. Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you. I appreciate all this conversation. To me, it looks like the board should make it very clear that face masks are expected, and that's the clarity that we need to provide. I understand what Mr. White is saying about there might be times in the classroom where the teacher, it's okay if someone takes off a mask, but I can't think of a scenario, but I'll just say that could be. But it's, the healthcare experts have talked about the problem with this virus being transmitted through airborne means, and that masks can help not save everyone, but it certainly can make a big difference. And we talk about 6 feet, but quite honestly, we are reading more about how this virus can spread further. If someone's speaking out loud, maybe yelling. if you've got someone coughing, sneezing, it can certainly go further. I think a way for us to protect and help our teachers, protect our teachers. I've heard from teachers who are very concerned about the fact that in an enclosed classroom, that we will not be requiring students to wear face masks. So my suggestion would be that we add, all students are required to wear face coverings while on district property, including classrooms and on district transportation. I say that instead of making a amendment to this, Dr. Melton, to see if there would be any problem from your perspective with us adding that.
Mr. Gates, may I seek clarity just for the revision of this policy? So thus far, I have heard under the section of students, the first line, Ms. Hutchison, if you'll confirm, all students are required to wear face coverings while on district property, including in the classroom. And then the rest of that sentence will continue on district transportation and those examples. Is that what I'm hearing being recommended?
Yes,
Are you making that as an amendment?
I will be happy to. I just wanted to get some feedback from Dr. Melton if she would find it difficult. I know you talked about enforcing this, but I strongly believe that if we have the expectation, just as we have the expectation that students wear IDs, that they follow the dress code, that students will also wear masks. And I do understand the political side of the mask, but I think as a school district and as a board, our responsibility is for the public safety of everyone in our schools, teachers, staff, students. And when the scientific evidence suggests or tells us to wear a mask, especially when you're inside, then I think that we need to make that part of the policy to wear them in the classroom in order to protect everyone that's in the school. So yes, Mr. Cates, I will I'd like to make an amendment to the motion that we add, including classrooms, under the students section where it says, it would then say all students are required to wear face coverings while on district property, including in the classrooms, and on district transportation, and the rest of that sentence just stays the same.
All right, thank you. Is there a second to that? Mr. White seconds. Discussion about the specific amendment to add including in the classroom. Mr. White.
And I do like what Ms. Hutchison's saying, because I do think this needs to be a default rule with limited exceptions. But I think, and I'm looking at it, because the comment I just made about do you decide who has the discretion, right now the only person that has discretion to override this rule is the superintendent or his or her designee, and maybe we just leave it like that, and that you have to authorize teachers or administrators to make exceptions, and you can do that, as you see appropriate, and maybe not on case by case, but maybe on a more global perspective if it requires, circumstances. But there's really nobody in there that can do it except you or somebody you designate. So maybe that's the better way to leave it with Ms. Hutchison's amendment, and then you can formulate directives to teachers as a sort of a general rule.
Ms. Gardner.
I would really like to have some input here, but just about the amendment, I don't even go back to what I want to say before, but the amendment part, it does say district property. I don't know why a classroom is excluded from that. And I think more general language is better here because it is contentious, and it gives the superintendent and the principal and the teachers more leverage to decide what the policy is going forward through administrative rule. So I like that it's vague. And I have more to say, but I still think district property includes classrooms, includes the bathrooms, classrooms, closets, everything.
Thank you. I'll come to you in a moment, Mr. Gant, Ms. Hammond, and then Mr. Lovelace, and then Mr. Gant. Ms. Hammond?
Oh, I thought you said Mr. Gant, forgive me. I'm putting on a teacher hat again. I really like Mr. White's point that we direct the superintendent to let this be. We're going to end up with what we need is a mask police. I don't disagree of the need and the safety of it, but I certainly believe every teacher we have, and if we have one that's not, Dr. Melton will take care of them, but that they are professionals. And we have got, we put the education of our children in those teachers' hands, and I believe they understand the seriousness of this virus. I think that those people that are very, very scared because they have underlying health conditions, they have someone in their family that live in their house, they have chosen the virtual. So they have we as a board are giving them that choice. I think here we cannot hamstring our teachers, our principals, and all the time being taken with adhering to this mask within the classroom if there might be the social distancing. I'm looking up here, there are 4 of us that don't have them on right now. We have them on, and you all have them on out there, but you're also 6 feet apart. I think that's nebulous, and I think we've got to allow the professionalism of a teacher to, I like the way you brought it to us. I don't support the amendment because I think it's putting more work on the teacher, the principal, and I really know when this is implemented, it'll just be that the whole attitude will be everybody's having to work on people without a mask and find them and, punish them.
Mr. Lovelace?
Dr. Melton, just to clarify this, would this teacher be the superintendent's designee? Or could you withhold if you had a teacher that you found, was not, responsible? And, I'm not saying there are any, I'm just asking, that gives you the power to make the designee. I just hate putting everything on the teacher when, if you have people that aren't going to go by the rules and you have to have some teeth in things. But would that, or is that what your intention is?
Mr. Lovelace, this is difficult
I know.
because just like families and students are going to have opinions, so do staff. We're going to have an expectation of the staff, so when it looks towards designee, the designee would have to engage the teacher because of their access and their observation of students. And the designee could also be inclusive of any school administrator, any staff member. If I am a staff member in the hallways and I happen to bypass a student in the hall that maybe go into the restroom and I see them, it's my responsibility as a staff member to engage with that student just like I should with any other student that I would see of a dress code infraction, as Dr. Harris mentioned earlier. If we saw that a student wasn't wearing an ID and I'm in the hallway but I don't know the student, I still have a responsibility to engage with that student to make sure that that person should be in the school as a student of record and that can prove they have an ID.
So what I'm getting at is that you have the right to pick and choose who the
Yes, sir.
designee is, and if you don't have some, I know in what we do, some people aren't responsible, and I'm not going to give them the authority to use my credit card, for example, and some people are very responsible. You know what I'm saying? And,
Yes, sir.
and just a blanket statement, I just wanted to make sure you were protected on that, that's all.
I appreciate the cover.
The only concern I have with the amendment is I'm not sure it really changes the paragraph because it does say on district property, and then it still leaves the exceptions to the requirement at the discretion of the superintendent, and it still has exceptions for wearing a covering may include, but are not limited to, following activities. So I don't know that it changes the, it does maybe state that we are supporting including in the classroom, but at the end of the day, I don't know if that changes that section of the policy. Mr. Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Cates. I thought you forgot me. I appreciate you coming back. Mr. Cates and fellow board members, I think we all know we've gotten an extreme amount of mail from mainly District 5 parents. And the one overriding theme, most parents are ready to go back to 5 days a week, face-to-face, full classrooms. Our state has opened for business. Our infection rates are at 18.5 to 20% on any given day of positive cases. Our state is open for business. At the same days we announce those kind of numbers, we open more businesses like bowling alleys and indoor dining. There seems to be weird a juncture. If we want to come back to school and show that we can put these numbers down, then we need to have a mask on when we're in school. To me, it's as simple as that. Do teachers have too much on them? Their plate is overflowing. Dr. Melton, your designee at all times is a teacher, and especially a teacher in the classroom. So to me, if we're serious about reopening our schools on October the 8th with 5 day a week, face-to-face classroom, all participants ready to go, all 17,200 that didn't choose virtual school, then I think we got to be serious about this policy. And it just makes it simple to me, just like an ID tag. All our students are required at certain grade levels to have on an ID tag. You know who administers that? The teacher. Ms. Hammond, you are a teacher. I know that. You probably could make a list as long as the table you're sitting at of the things you do every day in your school that don't really relate to teaching other than enforcing the rules. So I'm just saying this to say I support this amendment. I think if we don't want to be serious about opening our schools, and we think this 18.5 to 20% will just magically float away because we want to, then we're dreaming. If we want to open and be safe, this is one small thing that we can do. Our schools ought to be a mask zone, not a mask-free zone, but a mask zone. We don't need to confuse anybody about when you wear a mask on district, when or where you wear it on District 5 property. So I do support this amendment. I'd like for us to be serious about what we're doing and set an example for other folks to do the same thing. This is not going to go away on its own. Thank you, Ms. Hutchison, for the motion.
Ms. Gardner and then Mr. White.
I just wanted to point out the part of that we've been talking about, part of the policy that says certain classes or activities may be granted a limited exception to this requirement at the discretion of the superintendent or his or her designee. That's what we've been talking about. I'll tell you why I like this. It's because it allows both directions. If we find that there's very conclusive evidence that masks are very effective in this, then we can tighten our policy under this rule because the superintendent has allowed to say there are no exceptions. We wear our masks 24 hours while you're on campus, except while you're eating. Or if we continue now and we're trying to avoid the contentiousness of what's going on with our children and trying to wear masks, and there's a lot of, it's political, let's face it, it's a political thing right now where people feel about masks or not. It still allows for our policy to be like it is. What we've said, the superintendent is allowed to say, we can take them off if there's social distancing in your seat. And so I like that it's a little bit vague, and I think that's on purpose. So that allows us to tighten it and make it, there are no exceptions, or to allow the exceptions. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White.
And I agree with that, and I also agree that, that Mr. Cates and Ms. Gardner's comments that inserting while in the classroom doesn't technically change the meaning, but it does put a different emphasis on that. And I think I would rather, for all the reasons that Mr. Gant was just articulating as well, I would prefer that it does include in the classroom the language in the amendment, and it puts more emphasis on that. So if somebody is going to make an exception, they're going to have to be more deliberate. If you're in your seats, it just doesn't become just sort of accepted as soon as you walk in the classroom, take your mask off. So I think it just emphasizes the importance, and then the exceptions can be tailored as narrowly or as broadly as as circumstances, indicate are safe, or the superintendent from time to time has the ability to, expand or contract, the exceptions based on, the science and the data and whatever.
All right, other questions? All right, so the amendment,
Yeah, Ms. Hutchison waving at you.
oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Ms. Hutchison.
Thank you. I appreciate, Mr. White said exactly what I was wanted to point out was that it makes it very clear. I think that what we have there is not clear enough. I just had two emails from teachers saying that if it's mandated in this policy, it will make it easier to enforce. And I totally agree. And we've got the limited exceptions already built in if there's a different circumstance that we don't know. But I think we need to help our teachers by making it very clear that that is the expectation. Masks are for safety, IDs are for safety. I think it's very clear. We're not trying to make a political statement. We're trying to follow one of the superintendent's priorities is keeping our students safe, keeping our staff and faculty safe.
All right, thank you. Dr. Melton, I guess the question I would ask, or I don't know if it maybe is the reentry team, I don't know how to phrase it. If we add including in the classroom, but we leave certain class activities, may be granted exceptions, and exceptions for wearing coverings may include, does that, if we add this, is that going to change your reentry plan statement? How will that impact reentry as it's been presented the last 3 times? Or tell me you'll get back to me if we need to.
Let's vote.
Well, policy is only as effective as the interpretation and the supervision of it. So when you're as deeply involved with something as I am, I don't know that if, I'm trying to think through the lens of I'm a first-year principal, or I'm a first-year administrator, or I'm an administrator that hasn't been directly involved with some of these. So forgive me for wait time, but it's also 10:32, and I'm not sure that you're getting my best that you were getting earlier this evening. So it will affect, irregardless, this is going to affect our reentry planning, because the statements that you all have seen before that Dr. Harris has presented, our administrators have been, they have been previewed that, they are engaged with that, they are aware of that. This policy, they have not been engaged with, because we said to them when we met last Wednesday that we were putting a pause on this discussion because of the discussion this evening and not knowing what the will of the board was going to be. So, Mr. Cates, yes, it will affect reentry. Yes, it does rest in the interpretation and the administration of the policy. Will it derail? It will not. Will it alter? It will. But the policy will alter anyway, because there hasn't been a policy. This is, as you see, a suggestion, a temporary policy from School Boards Association. The language that you see here is consistent with Superintendent Spearman's expectations for the state operation. So I don't know if I gave you a complete
No,
answer,
that's-
but
no, I
that's what I can answer at this time that hopefully will give you enough information.
It's just late.
You got Ms.
Can
Gardner
we
down
ask
here.
one more
Ms.
question?
Gardner, I'm sorry.
So are you saying that the current, if we pass this as it's written tonight, you would still have to change your current trajectory or the current plan that you've put in our reentry plan?
Yes, ma'am, because we currently do not have a policy. We
But
currently
you
have an
told everybody that
expectation.
we are going to be able to sit at our 6-foot apart desks and take off our mask. Would that change specifically?
If we say including in classrooms, all students are required to wear face coverings while on district property, including in classrooms, then that could be interpreted as long as you're in a classroom, you're on district policy, thus you wear a mask. Yes, in my interpretation, that's how I would interpret it. Dr. Harris is shaking his head in agreement.
Okay, but if it's passed like it is, you would still be allowed to take off your mask if you were sitting at your desk, if you had 6 feet.
Without the insertion of the amendment, you could sit at your desk without wearing a mask. Yes, ma'am.
So we don't need to update that or ask for an amendment to change it to reflect that, but you would have full ability to make that an administrative. I just want to be clear what we're voting on, that's all.
I,
Ask me that question one more time, Ms. Gardner. Make sure that last one. I think I answered the others, but I don't think I got the last one.
Is there any amendments that we need to make to adhere to what you've already planned for the district and put in the reentry plan? Should we amend this in some way so that it reflects that we want you to have the ability to allow children to take their masks off if they're sitting at their desk?
The will of the board will determine that. So it's the recommendation of administration to leave, as the model says, the last sentence under discipline. The board authorizes the superintendent or his or her designee to amend these requirements. So if we were to have a situation where a classroom at an elementary school ABC was affected, that would give me, the very next morning, I could require masks in that entire grade level. If I'm a physical education teacher and I have visited multiple classrooms throughout my day, and then we needed to respond to that because as a physical education teacher, I became infected or I had presumed positive, then we would definitely, we would implement in response to that scenario as it's written now. If we do the insertion of including in the classrooms, then we would need to be prepared that we train teachers differently of how to expect masks and what might that do to instruction, and how do we give them the authority of when to remove masks, when is it appropriate, at what lesson do I teach where I can tell a student to remove their mask? Who do I have to get that permission from to seek the removal of mask? So then I would need to make sure that I'm clear to communicate that. And although I can say that to the staff during a return meeting of what used to be known as rally, and you hear it, but until you're in that moment to apply it, teachers are going to need support, communication, and scenarios. So administrators will hopefully tell you that I'm consistent to end our meetings with scenarios. What would you do if? To put them in that thinking, to put them in that moment to think through. I would say teachers deserve the same opportunity to experience some scenarios of real-life situations that we can predict that will happen because of things already that have happened during summer operations. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Say yes, say yes.
Mr. White?
I'm not sure I agree that the policy as written allows teachers to take it off if the kids are sitting 6 feet away without some discretion afforded to them. And that's, I mean, I look at the first paragraph and it says the CDC recommends something, but that's not our policy per se. That's just an introduction. And then you go down and it says staff members are required, all students are required. And originally I was thinking we needed to add teacher discretion. But we came back to the sentence of you have the ability to modify this rule at your discretion or your designee. And so you could empower teachers, you can empower, at least that's the way I would interpret it, you can empower teachers, you can empower administrators. You know, if, like the example you just gave, if you came in and you decided there's a particular problem in kindergarten through 5th grade that needed a different set of parameters in a classroom, you could instruct that and give those parameters. Or if you felt, you know, the older students, the teachers, you know, you gave them blanket discretion. I mean, I think you create that, and that was what Nikki was saying earlier. You can expand and contract that based on circumstances and your own judgment. But I personally like that, but I go back to, I don't think the amendment changes anything that's in here other than just adds extra emphasis, which where we're starting, we ought to have that extra emphasis, I think. And then if you want to expand exceptions, you can do that, or your designee. I mean, you can delegate another administrator or somebody to do it, but I don't read this today as giving them authority to take masks off at 6 feet. I mean, I just don't, if I'm missing a sentence, somebody tell me where it is, but I think if I'm hearing you correctly, I think as written, you have the authority to empower people or take that power away, and then you also, if we add the language of the classroom, we've just added a particular emphasis as a board that we're saying we think this is important enough to separately state it. That doesn't mean you can't create or empower somebody to create exceptions based on circumstances, whether it's grade levels or whatever.
Can we call for the question?
If you'd like to call for the question, but that'll take an amendment and a vote to call
no,
for the
then
question.
you decide.
Or you can let
You
me
decide.
put the question. I'll do that either way. Are there-
But am I missing something here, or are we just all getting late? Is it just
Well,
the way
I
it
It's
think-
is?
late, it's late.
We're all getting tired?
I do think it still gives the superintendent the latitude,
Yes.
but Ms. Gardner, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I just have a question about how the procedure would work here. If we would like to amend what's written here in a different way, do we have to wait till after we vote?
So we would have to dispense with this amendment,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you have another amendment, it can't be to that specific. You couldn't turn around and strike that.
Right.
But yes, but we have to deal with this amendment
Okay.
first.
Yes.
So and I recognize it's late, but I've also given folks equal time and as much time as needed. And so I appreciate the indulgence of the board to give other folks time as well. And that's why I had stated at the beginning of this meeting and also warned you ahead of time that this would be a long meeting because of the necessity of the items on the agenda. So the motion is that we amend the first sentence under students. All students are required to wear face coverings while on district property, including in the classroom, on district, that's the addition, on district transportation or attending school-related activity, and then e.g. athletic events, field trips, etc. It only changes that sentence, and it inserts including in the classroom. We've had a motion and a second. We've had ample time for discussion. As many as favor the amendment will raise their hand. I have 2 online and 2 present. Many as oppose the amendment will raise their hand. The amendment passes 4-3. Ms. Gardner, did you have another amendment you'd like to offer?
Yes, I move that we amend the policy under exceptions to be added a line item that says, it should say, well, and I'm not very eloquent, but it should say something like, at desks or while seated and sufficiently social distanced at a designee's, discretion or
I think the
something like that.
reentry statement, and Dr. Melton, I don't know if Dr. Harris would have that more at his fingertips, but I think the reentry says when social distancing is possible.
So that's what it should
Is
say.
that, am I,
Right, when it's
You got it?
possible.
I do
'Cause-
have it. This is from slide 17 of the report from this evening that Dr. Harris presented tonight. School District 5 will require the use of face coverings for students and staff. The district will provide face coverings to all staff and will provide face coverings for any student who cannot provide their own. Face coverings must be worn while entering, exiting, and moving throughout the building and during any congregate interactions inside or outside the classroom. Face coverings may be removed when students are seated at their workspaces. School District 5 believes that when staff and students wear masks, the spread of COVID-19 is significantly reduced.
is there a part of that you wanted to offer, Ms. Gardner?
Right, so the exception should say, while seated at workspaces, if social distance is allowed. And it probably needs to be still flexible based on what happens in the classroom. So it should still say at the discretion of the superintendent or his or her designee. So that way it's flexible.
I'm just writing it down so I can get it.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Good, 'cause
When
I
seated
wrote
at
it down.
workstations and social distancing permits, is that the essence of what the
Yeah.
amendment you're offering? And I believe that the flexibility comes again in the, let me get a second on that for it. Is there a second to that? Ms. Hammond? I believe the flexibility comes where it says certain classes or activities. So if that got to be a problem, there's still a way to say, nope, none of these exceptions, other than the one to eat. I hadn't quite figured out how we would
Right, yeah.
how to do that. Are there questions concerning the amendment? Again, the amendment is to add a fourth bullet point that says when an exception for wearing a face covering may include or but not limited to the following activities. The fourth bullet point would then read, when seated at workstation and social distancing permits. We've had a motion and a second. Are there questions? Ms. Gardner, did you want to speak to your motion before I moved on? Are there other questions? Ms. Hutchinson?
I I see what Ms. Gardner is saying, but I do think that the sentence, and someone might have just said it, certain classes may be granted, or activities may be granted a limited exception. I think that covers what Ms. Gardner is trying to say. My fear is that if we put that separate, that additional bullet, then that kind of contradicts what we just voted to do, is to say, to make a point, to emphasize the fact that masks are required. So it seems to me that it is implied that certain activities in the classroom, if the teacher deems it appropriate, masks can be removed. I don't think we need to really specify that, because I believe that muddies the water. It makes it more confusing, and I think we need to be very clear that masks are expected and not try to muddy the water.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak to the amendment? Ms. Gardner?
Just as a rebuttal to that, Ms. Hutchison, I don't know if you could hear, but we had that discussion, and it was very clear that that was not going to be able to be an exception if we didn't change the policy. So it needs to be in there for flexibility. I'm not saying it has to be something we have to implement, but it needs to be in there to allow for flexibility.
Right. Are there others that'd like to speak?
Yeah,
Mr. White?
I mean, I think what Ms. Hutchinson said, that is the path. I mean, you can get there the same way.
We'll tell the superintendent that, because she's the one who said that this is
but
not
look,
what
I
will
mean, you don't
happen.
believe you have the authority to give guidance to your administrators and your teachers to make, I mean, I read that as you have the discretion to make the exceptions, or your designee, and I'm not sure that I mean, I think my point for saying it earlier is it doesn't say unless there's, I mean, she has the ability to make the exception whether we put it in there or not. It's just the policy didn't
But if
say
we're going
that
to be
before.
specific about the difference between district property and a classroom, then we need to be specific about whether or not they have to have the class.
Well,
mask on
the
while they're
district
seated.
policy was an emphasis.
An activity is not necessarily being
Okay,
seated.
look, I think I understand both points there. Are there other, others that would like to speak? I think we're at the 4, the amendment. So, any others? So the amendment would, I'm sorry, Ms. Hutchison.
I don't really understand then what Ms. Gardner's amendment is. It seems, I'm not following it. It seems like we have that clarification. Ms. Gardner, can you explain that a little bit more? Because I'm not sure what the amendment would do differently than what's already in here.
If you'd like to speak to it, you can.
Well, I would probably ask Dr. Melton to speak to that, because I feel like I am trying to maintain what we've promised the school, the teachers, the children, the parents, trying to maintain that level. And from what I've been hearing, that this would not maintain that level. So I'm trying to mend it so that it does. But it gives her flexibility to tighten the controls if we have problems.
Ms. Gardner, I appreciate the clarity, and just from my assurance, when I say this, I'm referring to Dr. Harris's statement. So make sure I understand what you're asking me so that I can respond. So you're asking me if we take the excerpt from this statement regarding I just lost it. Their face coverings may be removed when students are seated, if we should insert that for a point of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that does give a point of clarity. I'll look to Dr. Harris because he will be directly involved with this implementation for this. Do I feel that I have authorization to do that the way it's currently written, the way the last line says that I'm authorized or my designee is to amend these requirements as necessary to meet the health and safety guidelines? The difficulty is going to be, it depends on the environment. We may have an expectation in one school that we don't have in another, because one school may be experiencing a situation that another is not. So with that, I feel like that is currently there, but if this were to be inserted, it brings one more point of clarity so that if I am the teacher and I'm trying to seek understanding, I could read in black and white to better understand rather than going upon what I've been told. So the more we have of how I interpret, how I relay via communication, the better we are positioning our school administrators, in my opinion, and the better we are positioning teachers, in my opinion, to be successful because they have something to read and understand rather than it depends and rather than based upon circumstances. Although we're going to have to use the it depends, and I'm not trying to, as my mother-in-law says, speak out of both sides of my mouth, but it becomes complicated when the environment changes and the variables are altered.
Mm-hmm.
Did I respond to what you're asking me?
I think so.
Thank you. The amendment reads, and I'm going to read part of the first sentence of these bullet points. Exceptions for wearing a face covering may include, but are not limited to, the following activities. The fourth bullet point would read, when seated at workstations and social distancing permits. That's the amendment, and if you favor Mr. Gant, did you have a question about the amendment? Because we've
No, I don't
had
have a
4 and
question. I
against.
hadn't weighed in on the amendment. I just think I finally understood it. I'd like to make a quick comment on it.
Yes, sir.
It's my first time to comment.
Yes, sir.
Okay? All right. I don't think adding this under one of the exceptions clarifies it at all, and that's my opinion. I think it gives our teacher in the classroom two absolutely conflicting statements. One says you're going to wear a mask if you're on District 5 property in our schools, and we're going to specifically talk about the classroom. And then we're going to make an exception if this amendment were to pass as fourth bullet point. So to me, it doesn't clarify it at all. Maybe it's gotten too late. I usually do pretty well at 10:53 at night, but I think if anything, it muddies the water. I think our teachers are going to say, well, I've got two things it tells me to do. Now, which one, Mr. Administrator, Mr. Assistant Administrator, Principal, what do I do? Dr. Melton? They may come all the way to the district office and ask you. You know, they're your designee, but I don't think we're clarifying at all if we add that. That's my two.
Thank you, Mr. Gant. All right, we've had ample discussion, and the amendment, I have stated the amendment. I don't think there's any confusion about it, Ms. Gardner.
Well, I guess I thought that the amendment would also include like at the teacher or at the designee's discretion. I thought it would include those words just so that it allows that to not be a thing if the teacher wants them to wear their mask the whole time.
And something I'd add to that as well, I mean, the outdoor recess exception says they're at a physical distance of at least 6 feet, I mean, it shouldn't be just vague to say, social distancing permits. It ought to be
Right.
equally as specific. If that's the CDC guideline and you can sit, like we're sitting at this table, some of us are taking masks on and off, and we're 6 feet apart or close to it, then
Yeah, my objective here is to make it more flexible, not less, because I think we're going to have problems with implementing this, and I want it to be what the teachers or the schools or the administrators can do the best with. And if we make it too rigid, either way, we're making it hard to follow. So I'm not sure I even like the amendment that I do like it, but I want it to be worded more flexibly. So I'm not sure how to.
So I'm going to have to rely on you. I tried to state the amendment, and we discussed the amendment as it was originally stated. And so if you can offer some clarity, I'll accept it, believe me. But I don't want to go back and
Right.
have another round of discussion about.
Well, like maybe
anything.
we should just add at the end, at the discretion of the superintendent's designee. Just put that at the end of the sentence, and that way it's the teacher, the administrator, the staff, whoever's needs to be in charge of making sure they have their mask on. And that way too, if there's a problem, it allows them to say, you can't, the whole classroom has to wear their masks the whole time.
And that kind of reiterates the sentence in the above paragraph. All right, so the amendment would read, when seated at a workstation and social distancing permits, at the discretion of the superintendent's designee.
Designee, yes.
Does that capture what you?
I think it does. I might need, I don't know.
So if you
Maybe
vote,
Dr. Harris will have to tell us how he feels about that, but.
if you vote yes on this, then we would adopt the fourth bullet point. Is there a question? Ms. Hutchinson, is there a question? I'm ready to state the question here.
Well, there is, and my phone is kind of blowing up with emails from teachers who, first of all, said, thank you for making it very clear with the First Amendment, and then they're saying this confuses this issue, or it negates the First Amendment. So I just wanted to report that now the teachers are worried because they're saying, well, this gives students like an out. They can, or it just muddies the water. I really do think that what Ms. Gardner is suggesting is already covered in that sentence that says, they.
I understand that. I think everybody has had a chance to speak for or against the amendment. And so I'm going to state the question. As many as favor the amendment as stated, when seated at workstation and social distancing permits, at the discretion of the superintendent's designee. That will be the fourth bullet point. As many as favor the amendment will raise their hand. As many are opposed the amendment will raise their hand. That amendment passes 4-3. That brings us to, are there any other questions concerning this group of policies? I realize we hadn't even voted on the policies yet. Any questions, remaining questions on this group of policies? The motion before the board is that policies for adoption, Exhibit E, GBAB, Title IX, employees, Title IX students, and ADD face coverings as amended be adopted. As many as favor the adoption of these policies will raise their hand. As many as favor, and that passes unanimously.